Alex, welcome to another episode of Happy Days with Callum Church. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. To kick us off, and just to sort of introduce yourself to the audience, do you want to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So my name's Alex. I'm technically what you could call a life coach. Don't tend to like the term life coach because, you know, anybody from the UK will know about Jez from Peep Show and the life coaching qualification that he had. It's got a bit of a strange, scammy kind of connotations in the UK. But, you know, it's... I'm helping people with, to become just more present, overcome anxiety, overcome low self-esteem. I help some people with building businesses and conscious entrepreneurism. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag really, but mostly I'm using the power of coaching, which is asking powerful questions in order to raise awareness and responsibility within someone else. With teachings from what you could call presence, mindfulness, consciousness, it has many names, in order to transcend out of the overthinking and the anxiety that comes from overthinking and being too identified with thoughts and coming into a deeper presence. So yeah, I call myself a consciousness coach. So that's combining mindfulness and presence with what you could call pure coaching.
How did you get started doing that?
How did I get started? Good question. Question is, where do you start? I got started from a place of suffering, really, about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. No, it must be longer than that. It's got to be 5 years ago now. I was on the arse end of a breakup, and that relationship was a decade long. And the fallout of that breakup meant that I just had tons and tons and tons of very torturous thoughts in my mind about what had been, like, what did I do wrong? How could this happen to me? What am I going to do now? How am I going to afford my place to live? What am I going to do about my future? My whole mind became a very torturous place to be. And so I was just looking for information initially on how to transcend my own suffering. And so where did I go? YouTube, audiobooks, things like that. And found people on YouTube talking about their own experience with breakups and, you know, finding camaraderie and connection and help from people that were a little bit further along the path than me. And also, you know, I was always interested in spirituality, personal development and things like that. But I would say, you know, it reached a new level when, you know, you're in deep suffering, and that's when you really, that's when you actually really need the information the most. So all I knew at the time was to, you know, connect with these people on YouTube and deep dive further into the spiritual and personal growth information that I ever had done before. A big part of that was listening to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Many people will know that book. It's very famous. If anybody hasn't read it, highly recommend it. But it was the book that really made things click for me. You know, it really helped me. Like I said, when you started asking the question, my mind became a torturous place after this breakup, right? So when you're in the depths of suffering in the mind, that can create a strong desire within you to transcend it, to step out of the thinking and into presence. And that's what that book showed me how to do. And so, you know, through watching these YouTube videos and connecting with people that had also been through breakups and slowly healing and reading personal development books and absorbing information from Eckhart Tolle and other people talking about presence and spirituality and consciousness, about 3 months later, I found myself sitting in a bar, just having a drink, and I had like half a pint of alcohol. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't any drugs, I hadn't smoked any weed. And I'm like starting to feel euphoric. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I feel euphoric now. And 3 months ago, I was like in the depths of hell in my mind, like a nuclear bomb had gone off in my brain, and I was the only one who knew about it. And so I was thinking, how did I come from such deep suffering to this feeling of euphoria in such a short space of time? And what I put it down to is the investment of time into, spirituality, personal development, personal growth. And it was at that moment that I thought, well, how can I help other people transition the same gap? How can I save them even more time? How can I apply all the lessons that I've learned about transcending suffering and reaching a place of peace and happiness, and provide that service to others? And through an exploration of how to do that, I think I did actually see a coach myself, research some other modalities of healing and mental health and coaching. And eventually arrived at coaching as as my personal path and personal way of helping people. And so I started my YouTube channel, my Instagram, and my coaching business, and the rest is history.
It's awesome, man. It's awesome stuff that you talk about. For the listeners, what is consciousness? Because you mentioned it a few times, and for some people, even skeptics and those types, it's quite difficult to pinpoint because it might be seen as a little abstract. So what's consciousness to you?
Well, to me, first of all, it might be easier to give a reference point in the sense that it depends. What you believe consciousness to be depends on the philosophy that you have about reality. You could say the mainstream perspective is what you could call a materialist or physicalist perspective. So the idea is that we live in a world made of matter, and consciousness arises out of matter and is produced by the brain, right? So this is the mainstream view, that consciousness is a subjective experience that arises from the physical structure of the brain. That's not my personal view anymore. I have edged slowly, and I've arrived at what you could call a consciousness model, a consciousness only model of the universe. And this is in line with the teachings of people like Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira, and relates back to the Indian mystics and the Hindu traditions and many other spiritual and religious traditions. The view that consciousness, to answer your question, is all that exists. It's everything. We are. The easiest way to explain it, or a metaphor, is that when you're, like, if you look at things from a materialist perspective, right? So if you're in a dream, then the idea is that you're experiencing the inside of your own mind, right? If you're seeing the streets of London in a dream, the idea is you're not actually seeing the streets of London, or you're not actually seeing other people. You're seeing an image generated by the inside of your own mind, your own consciousness. So following that logic, could it not be that instead of living in a world made of dumb, dead matter out of which consciousness arises, we're in fact living in essentially a huge mind, that the world that we're experiencing around us is whatever you want to call it, the infinite mind, God's mind, the universal mind, whatever you want to call it. So long answer, but the short answer is consciousness is everything.
You mentioned that you use consciousness to sort of pull yourself out of that, the tormenting space within your brain. Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah.
How do you do that?
Using consciousness. Well, here's the thing with a lot of these, how should we say, with a lot of these teachings, language the use of language starts to break down a little bit, and you make lots of concessions, and there's lots of different people, different teachers and different people use terminology to refer to different things. In terms of like using consciousness as such, the closest I can get to there is to say, you know, I might say something like becoming more conscious or being more conscious. And that can mean many things, really. That can mean, you know, trying to be a kinder person, a nicer person, trying to connect with love and truth, etc. But the way I might use it the most is essentially synonymous with becoming more present, or being more present, or becoming aware that you're aware. So right now in your experience, if you go to your experience, and this is for yourself and the listeners, you have yourself, this awareness within which your experience arises, and within that space of awareness arises thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. And most of us tend to go around for most of the day with our attention contracted down onto thought. You know, you see people walking, there's this saying, I'm not sure who said this, but you know, the only difference between us and the so-called crazy person who's walking down the street talking to himself is that he's doing it out loud and we're doing it in our head. You see people going around, you know, we're always listening to this internal voice. So being more conscious is becoming aware that your attention is often continuously and compulsively contracted down onto this story, this narrative, these thoughts in your mind. And it's an expansion of the attention back out, initially to sense perceptions. So right now you can become aware of any sensations in your body, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the fact that there is vision and audio, and you're divesting attention from the thinking and expanding back out into a space of presence. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that so much of our suffering is generated by over-identification with the thinking. So becoming more conscious or becoming more present is about realizing that we are deeper than the thinking, realizing that we're talking to ourselves in our heads all the time and generating a lot of suffering, like I was at the end of that breakup, and living more in the formless, timeless space of presence and becoming closer to who we essentially are, which is the peaceful awareness within which our experience arises.
Yeah. Here's a big question for you. When I first came across you, I saw a YouTube video of yours, and it was talking about gaining access to infinite intelligence. We mentioned it earlier in the podcast, kind of like this, you mentioned the word God. It can be perceived in many different ways.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, this is getting really deep now into the spiritual and that kind of thing. But this is something I'm exploring myself personally at the moment, because I just find it fascinating and interesting. How do you tap into that? Can you use it as well?
Well, I guess the reason why you're asking the question is because I made a video called "What is infinite intelligence?" or how to access infinite intelligence. That's the video I made a video on. When you're a YouTuber, sometimes you're trying to target keywords, right? Because you want to be more popular so you can get more volume in your business, right? So you can have clients and actually like pay your bills, right? So, Napoleon Hill was one of the people that changed his books changed my life. And the concept of infinite intelligence, I'm not sure whether it originated with him, but it was certainly brought to public awareness by him. It's a concept from Napoleon Hill. And I made that video on infinite intelligence, not necessarily because I'm always going around trying to sell people on the idea of infinite intelligence, but it's because it's a concept that is popular and many people may be searching for. And I wanted to, add my perspective and my, I just want to help people access deeper levels of creativity, and help people and help myself create the reality that we want to create. So knowing that you were going to ask this question and thinking that I made that video 2 years ago and I'm probably not going to give you the best answer, I got the answer from Napoleon Hill here. So infinite intelligence, according to Napoleon Hill, is the force that gives order and origin to everything in the entire universe. It is the prime source, the first cause of everything that comes into existence. Furthermore, you are the individual, are a precise expression of this force. As such, you have no limitations except those accepted or deliberately set up in your own mind. Additionally, all that is needed to access this creative power is absolute belief, total applied faith, and unwavering persistence. So, I guess it's the idea that there's this source of information or intelligence that goes beyond the limitations of the finite mind, and that many great inventors, influencers, change makers, creatives, artists do seem to share this common experience that when they drop out of the thinking mind and into deeper presence and combine that with desires and emotions and creative imagination, hunches and inspirations seem to pop up out of nowhere that seem almost divine, or like just incredibly creative, or much more intelligent than you usually feel when you're trying to work things out with the thinking mind. It's the hunches and inspirations that pop into your mind when you're sitting on a toilet or in the shower or just dozing off. And what is happening, like, for example, when you're in the shower, we're talking about presence coming from thought to sense perceptions. When you're in the shower, what's happening? You're usually immersed in the water, there's the heat, it's a very sensory rich experience, and it may be for a lot of people the one time that they drop out of that thinking for a moment and into the sensory field. And it's almost like the thinking mind is often, when we're over identified with it, and when this narrative is so continuous, there's no space for this deeper intelligence to arise and like pierce through, you could say. So accessing this concept of infinite intelligence really is about dropping into deeper states of presence by moving the attention either from thought to sense perceptions, or becoming aware that you are the aware spaciousness. If I ask you, are you aware? What do you do to check that? That you are this aware spaciousness that your experience arises within, and instead using not so much the voice in the head, but the imagination, and dropping into the stillness and dropping into the silence within you, and being patient and waiting for creative hunches and deep inspirations to arise out of that stillness. So practically, for me, sometimes it's just lying on the sofa and closing my eyes and letting ideas stew until something pops in.
Do you think we're kind of losing that ability to do that in the world that we live in right now? Because I look at things like the education system, certain environments which people might be living in as things which can kill creativity, imagination, your ability to tap into a concept like infinite intelligence. Would you agree with that? Do you think that we live in a world which pushes us towards losing that ability?
I think that our expansion into the future means we're seeing more contrast and more polarity. We're being pulled in opposite directions, really. On one hand, yes, we may be moving into a world where there's more emphasis on doing and thinking and producing and, laborious activities, which may take away, in a way, from time to be present and be aware and use our imagination. And yes, in a way, our culture is set up, like the industrial capitalist complex is set up in a way to condition us into just being producers and keeping the wheel turning. And on the other hand, because of the internet, because of the access to information we have nowadays, so many more people can access information, from teachers of spirituality to neuroscience, to help us access deeper levels of creativity. So yeah, the answer is that it's both. It depends on what you're exposed to and what you're exposing yourself to. Yeah, on one hand, our society conditions us away from creativity in some ways. On the other hand, we have greater access to information than we ever have done before. When I first started listening to people like Alan Watts, and when I was 15, there was like a few hundred downloads on some MP3 downloading software. Now each video on YouTube has tens or hundreds of thousands of plays. So yeah, that's the answer really. I think we're moving in both directions at once.
Yeah. No, that's good. So you yourself, you kind of said that you were a life coach, even though you don't quite like that tag or that label, and you help people, you coach people. So how can we use consciousness to benefit us as people on our own self-development journeys, whether that be overcoming anxiety or simply just becoming better people, becoming our better selves? How do we do that? Can you do that?
So I feel like there's two questions there. There's the anxiety and then the self-improvement aspect. In terms of overcoming anxiety, coming back to this concept of becoming more conscious, becoming conscious or becoming present, it's the recognition. It's coming to an understanding of what anxiety really is. Now, there's many different ways you can define it, and there's many different opinions from different perspectives and different philosophies about how it originates, why it's present. But usually when we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about the kind of day-to-day anxiety that people experience in their life and they feel is unnecessary. We're not usually talking about anxiety that seems to be legitimate. I mean, if you knew that there was, I don't know, 10 murderers living on your street, there'd be some legitimacy to having some anxiety and having this feeling that you want to get the hell out of there. But we know that most of our we have this instinctual realization that most of our anxiety is unnecessary. Is that there's a quote, isn't there? I can't remember who it's by. I'm going to completely butcher this quote, but it's something like, I've had a million problems, and all of them have been in my mind, or none of them have come true, or something like that. So, so much, that's a terrible, I've totally butchered that. But, a lot of this anxiety is generated by over-identification to thinking. So thoughts arise within our mind, and we may have thoughts that arise based on our past conditioning, that propose this future that we don't want to experience. Anxiety is usually that the future that we don't want to experience is just around the corner, and it could be really bad. For example, my anxiety was things like, my heart's racing? Have I got something wrong with my heart? I'm having heart palpitations. I went and got is it an EEG to check my heart out? I had a lot of anxiety around whether I was going to go, I might go crazy, I might lose my mind, all these kinds of things. And, obviously we can say that these weren't legitimate concerns, but my identification to that thinking and believing in all of those thoughts is what generated and perpetuated so much of that anxiety. So in terms of becoming more conscious or becoming more present, it's the understanding that you are deeper and more than the sense of self in that anxious story in your mind. And becoming aware that you're the spaciousness within which that story arises, that you are the observer of the thoughts and not the sense of self in the thoughts. And here's another quote: nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right?
Yeah. So
if you can recognize when your anxious thoughts are unnecessary, and either divest attention from the thought and move towards sense perceptions and your experience of the present moment, then you are stepping out of that anxious story and into the peaceful spaciousness, or becoming aware that you are the peaceful spaciousness within which that story arises. I call it like a zooming out. Let's say, I'll give you an example. I had times in my business where, at the beginning of my business, where, cash flow was there one month and not there the other month. And maybe a thought might flash into my mind. What if I lose all my money? What if I have to tell people that my business has failed? What if all these projections into the future, and then the adrenaline gets released and everything like that. And you're thinking like, is this really necessary to identify so strongly with? So in that moment, it's zooming out from that story, zooming out and becoming aware of the silence and the stillness and the spaciousness within you, which provides liberation from the anxious story.
Awesome. How, are there any sort of practices that people can put in place to get better at being more present, or get better at being more conscious? I mean, something which I feel has, helped me vastly in my own life for a number of reasons is meditation. Does that help this kind of thing, or is there, is this like a muscle which we can train and condition to get better at being more conscious?
The answer depends on the particular path that the particular teaching you're listening to, or the particular path that you're going down. On one level, you could say that presence can be a practice, in the sense that you can practice sitting on a pillow or a chair, and every time thinking starts to distract your attention, then move that attention back to the object of the meditation. That's the most common form of meditation, right? What you could call objective meditation. So that is, becoming one-pointed in your attention to an object, as opposed to just the thinking mind. So that could be anything from a candle flame to a mantra, to the breath, to a feeling in your body. And you could say that is a type of practice. And you could say on one level, you're getting better at it, or more, or deepening your presence power. But I really like this Rupert Spira quote. He said, meditation is not something that we do, it's who we are. Now, that may initially seem confusing, but it's coming to the realization that what we're really doing is the thinking. We're doing the thinking. How much effort really is it to be who you really are, which is the awareness within which the experience arises? Another Spiro metaphor, maybe he got this from someone else, but if you clench your fist really, really tightly, if someone was to clench their fist really, really tightly and leave it there for hours or perhaps days, it may feel like effort to release, because you've been like it for so long. We've been identified with this thinking and thinking this is all of who we are, pretty much, or we always are, this sense of self in our thinking for so long, then it can feel like effort, or it can feel like a practice to drop out of that into who we truly are, which is the observer of those thoughts, which is the space in which those thoughts arise, which is pure awareness. So on one level, yes, you can practice presence. On the deepest level, being presence, awareness, your true authentic self, is no effort, because it's who you already naturally and essentially are. It's just a case of realizing that, dropping into that realization, becoming aware that you are the awareness, and gradually making your home there. And actually, that's a release of effort. That's a cessation of the doing. It's the cessation of the thinking, and dropping into the still, spacious, formless awareness that you are.
Yeah, awesome stuff. So how can we, going back to the question I asked earlier, we spoke about how we can use consciousness to overcome anxiety and that kind of thing. How can we use consciousness to become better people, talking from a more self-development perspective?
Oh yeah, you did ask that question, didn't you? I forgot about that. Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by a better person. How would you define a better person?
Well, I mean, it's subjective for everyone, right? Because I think self-development is a very personal journey, so it of course it's subjective for everyone, but I don't know. I guess I was just kind of throwing that question in there just to see how you perceive it, and just let you answer it however which way you want.
Sure. Well, when it comes to, I think one of the concepts that arise with people into personal development, self-help and things like this is this concept of self-actualization, right? Which I guess is like fulfilling your potential, or maybe it's the ability to create a reality which is most in line with the truth of who you are. So I would say that it can be a path for people to discover the depth of who they are, and to discover their essential nature, and to discover that that essential nature is already peaceful and subtly happy, and self-actualize, create, and express in the world as a celebration of that realization. We are conditioned, aren't we, to perpetually improve, to try to arrive at some point in the future when we're going to be good enough, healed enough, whole enough, good enough, or whatever it is. So, I get clients that come to me who have literally got self-help addiction and are trapped in this notion that they're never going to be, trapped in this cycle of always needing to improve, always needing to become better and more actualized. And I mean, like, even the term actualized, that presumes that there's an ending. Self-actualizing is a more appropriate term, really, because where is the ending? You can always earn more money. You can always be more spiritual, or become more present, or help more people, or build a better business, or give more money to charity, or be a, whatever it is. Like, you can always, there's always more. So, but what generates so much of the suffering is this notion that in order to be happy and peaceful and whole, we have to perpetually self-actualize with this illusion that at some point we're going to finally arrive. And people find out that they never arrive, and that there's always more to do, and they always feel like there's something missing. So, becoming more conscious, more present, becoming aware that you're aware, perhaps is a bit about realizing that what you essentially are is already peaceful and whole. And that doesn't mean then that, okay, well, that's it, life's over, I'm at peace, I can die now. I mean, there is the joy of creation. There is manifestation for some kind of reason, isn't there? Everybody's got a different view on what that is, but if we come back down to the basics, there is a joy to expansion and to creation, but the sustainable path of doing that from a continuously relatively peaceful and happy place is to do that as a celebration of who you authentically are already, as opposed to trying to get to some better future.
Yeah, interesting stuff, man. Yeah, I mean, I love these kinds of conversations, and I think it's awesome to challenge ourselves consciously. Does that make sense? I mean, I just like exploring these things because I find it challenging, and I think that maybe I'm one of those people like your clients who is always sort of addicted to developing and growing, or whatever it is that you search for in your self-development journey. But the conversations like these intellectually challenge me, but also just as a person. And I don't know, I really enjoy it. So thank you for what you've shared so far. It's been a super deep and, as I say, challenging conversation. So let's move it on now. Let's talk about your advice for young people, because I've got a lot of young listeners. You're a guy who's been through a lot of different experiences. You're clearly very conscious, so I'm just intrigued to hear what your advice would be for young people. What's some of the key sort of tips, advice, whatever you want, which you think young people need to know?
Are you saying that I'm not a young person? But yeah, well, I'm a young person, really, aren't I? I'm still young. No, I am 35 now, and through my experience up till now, I would say the biggest shift for me was learning about what we've been talking about here, what it's always been circling back to: presence. I would say learning, understanding that you are not the sense of self, or not just the sense of self in your thinking, that you are deeper than that, that you are the presence, the spaciousness, the awareness within that arises, is probably the most important thing that you'll ever learn. It was the most important thing that I ever learned, because that is the source of so much of our suffering, is over-identification to the fearful, anxious story in our mind. And when you know yourself as only that, that can feel very limiting, and at the worst, completely torturous, like a hell, because there only has to be a certain amount of events to happen in your life for that story in your mind to become a hellish one. But like you say, you like a challenge. These challenges, this challenge that's created by thinking, when it becomes anxious, when it becomes depressive, whatever it is, when it becomes really torturous, that can be the thing that creates that desire to discover yourself on a deeper level. You know, this is the gift of suffering, really, is that it can create the desire within us to transcend it. And that's what put me onto these teachings that I'm talking about. But also, you don't have to have suffering to discover that. You can also do that before you hit a wall as well. And research into, you know, presence, mindfulness. People like Eckhart Tolle, Rupert Spira, and myself, hopefully.
Absolutely.
To discover that aspect. So yeah, got distracted, but I hope that answers your question.
No, it's awesome. It's great. Thank you. Second to last question now. What do you think makes a happy, fulfilled life? Because that's something which everyone wants, right? Everyone wants to be, you know, happy, or at least they want to feel fulfilled, you know, because happy is an emotion. Some people don't chase that. But certainly everyone wants to be fulfilled, right? What do you think makes that from your perspective?
Well, it may be something, an idea as such, which may be initially resisted by a lot of people, and which was initially resisted by me, to say that what you essentially are is already fulfilled and whole. But it's discovering that. It's discovering that, it's discovering the nature of who you essentially are. There's a difference between the sense of self in the story, in the thinking, and the one who's aware of the thinking, the awareness within which the thinking arises. So through explorations into mindfulness, presence, the direct path, non-duality, your listeners can Google all that stuff, you can get on a path to discovering what you essentially are. And that can lead to discovering what you essentially are as this formless awareness is already peace, is already love, is already fulfilled, and is already whole. And then, like I said, the self-actualization, or the things that you do in your life, become a celebration of that, as opposed to this notion that you have to do all of this stuff to create fulfillment. Yes, there are things that you can do in your life that are very joyous. You know, if you create a piece of art or a business or a piece of music or something, there's a feeling that goes with that. And there is a joy in that creation. There is a joy in that expansion and self-actualization. but the sustainability of that comes within, like I said, doing that on behalf of your authentic self, as opposed to on behalf of the limited separate self. So it's about discovering who you essentially are and discovering the peace and subtle happiness that is at the core of your being.
It's a fascinating answer, really fascinating answer, because I haven't, I asked a lot of people that question and they come up with lots of different things, but that's the first time someone said it's already there. You know, you just have to explore it and take it and find it yourself. You know, that's fascinating. Okay, last question of the podcast. This one's a bit of fun. Well, it is a bit of fun, but some people answer it in lots of different ways. It's super subjective, it's super cliche, but it's always a really fun answer, a question to ask, because you get lots of really fun answers. So, Alex, can you tell me, mate, what's your meaning of life?
Meaning of life, wow. Well, I guess I could answer it in, there's two layers to this, really. I would say, you know, one of our deepest, or if not the deepest purpose of life, is to discover who you truly are, as I've been saying. Discover yourself as awareness, and the meaning, I guess, is it is that joy of creation, that joy of expansion, that celebration of that realization. That it's like asking, like, why did the universe become into being? Maybe because it wanted to. It's the original desire, isn't it? It's the original source of creation. So, you know, manifestation is present because there is contrast. You wouldn't know up if there wasn't down. You wouldn't know happiness if you didn't have sadness. You wouldn't know love if you didn't feel the lack of love. So this reality comes into being through that contrast. And it's like learning to surf that contrast, but at this, and really, you know, indulging in all the ups and downs and the roller coaster of life, at the same time as knowing yourself as deeper, as knowing yourself as ultimately indestructible. Here's another metaphor for you. If you're watching a movie, many different things could happen in that movie. There could be a wonderful love story. There could be explosions. But that story, that movie, is brought into life by the screen. The screen is what gives it life. But notice, whatever happens in the movie, whether there's an amazing love story or the biggest nuclear explosion, it's never going to harm, modify, limit, crack, make anxious, or make depressed the screen. The screen is undisturbed by the content. And in the same way, the awareness that you are is undisturbed by the content of awareness. The awareness that you are is undisturbed by the content of your experience. And so it's discovering that. And then not necessarily using that to retreat from life, but taking that understanding into your life and re-engaging with the world and the joy of creation and the ups and downs and the roller coaster of life from that deeper understanding.
Mm.
That's the best answer I can give you.
It's a brilliant answer. Thank you so much for joining me for the episode, Alex. It's been a really, really fun conversation, actually, because I love exploring this stuff, like I said, and yeah, you what you talk about is truly quite fascinating, and yeah, it's been great. So thank you for joining me, Alex, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Callum.
So there you go. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe on your podcasting app of choice so you can download and listen as each episode is released. If this episode helped you in any way, tell your friends, tell your family, maybe even leave a cheeky review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show. But that's all for now. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode, released shortly. Take care.